I accepted the night shift librarian position at Greenwood Community Library shortly after graduating from college, eager for a quiet, predictable job that suited my introverted personality. Located in a modest suburb, Greenwood Library was a favorite among students and retirees during the day, but by night, it belonged solely to me. After closing at 9, I spent hours reshelving books, organizing returns, and checking inventory, tasks that filled my shift from sunset until just before dawn. My solitude was unbroken, except for occasional visits from the overnight janitor, Carl, whose presence rarely disturbed the calm. The first months of my employment passed without notable incidents. The orderly rows of bookshelves, clearly labeled by Dewey decimals, offered stability. My attention to detail made me particularly good at recognizing misplaced or incorrectly cataloged volumes, often discovering small errors overlooked by the daytime staff. Gradually, I developed a methodical routine, beginning each shift by collecting books scattered across the reading tables, then moving systematically through each aisle to restore order. I found comfort in these predictable cycles, turning mundane repetition into quiet satisfaction. One night, while shelving psychology textbooks, I noticed a subtle irregularity. Initially, the difference was small enough that it barely registered. A single missing page from a volume detailing psychological profiling methods. I examined the edges carefully. They were precise, almost surgical, leaving no ragged tears or sloppy evidence of casual vandalism. It seemed deliberate and careful, clearly executed with purpose. Intrigued but unconcerned, I moved on, attributing the anomaly to careless handling by students, or perhaps someone avoiding library fees for damaged materials. As I continued shelving, the pattern emerged more clearly. Several other psychology books showed identical damage, each missing pages with similar, meticulous precision. Curiosity transformed into mild alarm as I realized the targeted pages weren't random. They all covered sections detailing obsessive psychological behaviors, profiling stalkers, case studies of harassment, obsessive-compulsive disorders manifesting as fixation, and texts describing methods of manipulation and intimidation. The deliberate nature of the removal unsettled me deeply, as each torn section appeared carefully chosen, systematically removed, and leaving no margin of error. It was clear this was neither accidental nor random vandalism. It was the calculated removal of specific, sensitive information. Driven by concern, I began to thoroughly check each shelf in the psychology section, carefully inspecting every book. My investigation uncovered even greater consistency. Every damaged book belonged specifically to a subset focusing on abnormal psychology and behavioral analysis, each missing precisely the sections describing compulsive or obsessive traits. This level of precise targeting suggested a troubling intent, indicative of someone studying these behaviors rather than merely destroying library property. The disturbing implications of why someone would need these pages started becoming evident to me, heightening my discomfort with each discovery. Over the next few nights, I took detailed notes on the affected books, documenting their call numbers and titles. My curiosity transformed into meticulous investigation. I checked the circulation records, noticing a disturbing pattern. The books had been checked out by the same library card number multiple times in recent weeks. However, the borrower's information was incomplete, a common occurrence with the library's guest borrowing system. Without clear evidence or identifying details, I hesitated to report it, worried my observations might be seen as overly suspicious or paranoid. A week later, while reviewing surveillance footage from earlier nights, something typically reserved for security personnel. I observed Carl, the janitor, lingering near the psychology section long after completing his cleaning tasks. His behavior was methodical and deliberate. He carefully chose specific books, leafing through them patiently, clearly searching for particular content. When he found the pages he needed, he discreetly and skillfully tore them out, pocketing them quickly before returning the books neatly to their shelves. The realization unsettled me deeply. Carl had been working at the library for years, long before my arrival, and his quiet, unassuming demeanor had never attracted suspicion. The following night, I watched him more closely. As usual, Carl arrived promptly at 11, nodding briefly as he passed by my desk before disappearing among the aisles. After an hour, curiosity compelled me to quietly follow his path through the library. From behind distant shelves, I observed as he meticulously searched for specific titles, periodically jotting down notes on a small notepad, pulled discreetly from his pocket. Concerned, but uncertain how to proceed, I decided to search online for news or police reports, referencing any local incidents involving stalking or harassment. My research revealed several unsolved cases over the past year, incidents where individuals, primarily young women, reported being followed or receiving unsettling anonymous letters. Authorities noted the letters contained strangely detailed psychological insights, unsettling their recipients profoundly. The pattern of harassment, however, remained unresolved due to insufficient evidence. Piecing together the fragments of information, I reluctantly acknowledged the possibility that Carl's actions might be connected to these incidents. I compiled detailed notes of my observations and gathered copies of surveillance footage showing his activities clearly. The evidence was substantial enough to justify reporting my concerns anonymously to library management and, subsequently, to local law enforcement. Authorities responded swiftly, conducting a discreet yet comprehensive investigation into Carl's background and recent activities. Police visited the library late one evening, quietly detaining him as he prepared to leave following his shift. During subsequent questioning, Carl confessed to removing pages from library books, claiming an obsessive interest in psychological methods used to instill fear in victims. Though he denied involvement in any criminal acts beyond vandalism, evidence collected at his apartment revealed carefully assembled dossiers containing detailed personal information about multiple local residents, along with drafts of letters similar to those reported by victims. Carl's arrest made local headlines briefly, before fading from public attention, the community quickly returning to its routines. Greenwood Community Library tightened security protocols, implementing mandatory identification for borrowing certain types of materials and installing additional surveillance cameras. My job remained unchanged, yet the comfortable solitude I once cherished became strained by heightened awareness of potential threats hidden behind seemingly benign appearances. Months passed, but my nightly routine never fully regained its previous ease. I continued to shelve books, organize materials, and monitor inventory closely, now hyper-aware of subtle irregularities previously dismissed without concern. Greenwood Library remained quiet and orderly at night, outwardly unchanged by events that briefly exposed its vulnerability. Yet for me, the reassuring stability I had once found within its walls had vanished permanently, replaced by the unsettling knowledge that even the most ordinary environment could conceal unsettling truths. I worked the night shift at Fairview General Hospital for nearly 2 years, primarily restocking medical supplies and patient rooms. The hospital, a large facility accommodating hundreds of patients daily, buzzed constantly during daylight hours with families rushing through corridors, doctors urgently moving from room to room, and nurses diligently caring for their patients. Yet, after midnight, the pace gradually slowed, settling into predictable rhythms. The quiet hum of fluorescent lights replaced daytime chatter, punctuated occasionally by distant footsteps and muted voices. The halls emptied, leaving only essential staff navigating the sterile maze of corridors, and the occasional sound of equipment softly beeping from patient rooms. Despite its size, the hospital took on a much smaller feel in these late hours, as if it contracted inward when no one was watching. My shifts passed quietly in this subdued atmosphere, my movements blending seamlessly into the hospital's nocturnal rhythms, my presence unnoticed, like the gentle hum of air conditioners, filtering steadily through the ceilings. During these late hours, I'd grown accustomed to the muted routines and predictable rhythms. Nursing staff moved quietly between stations, technicians checked machines with practiced detachment, and janitors silently polished the gleaming floors. I rarely interacted beyond brief nods, exchanged in dim hallways or whispered greetings at the coffee station. The nocturnal quiet, though initially unsettling when I began this position, became a comfortable background to my monotonous routine. Each night was predictably similar. I would gather my cart, filled meticulously with bandages, syringes, saline bags, and other supplies carefully accounted for, and then methodically distribute items room by room. Nurses drifted silently in and out, attending to patients with hushed professionalism. Doctors rarely appeared at these hours unless urgently summoned, their absence lending an illusion of calm that masked the ever-present underlying tension inherent to medical care. Still, I maintained a comforting distance from the patients themselves, rarely glimpsing more than a sleeping face or closed door. One Thursday around 2 a.m., as I rolled my supply cart down the fourth-floor hallway, I noticed Nurse Rebecca standing next to a patient's IV stand. Rebecca was a familiar face, quietly working nights as long as I had. The dim glow from the patient's bedside lamp illuminated her normally unreadable face, revealing an intense concentration I'd never observed before. Rebecca was known for her silent efficiency, a nurse who rarely spoke unless absolutely necessary. This unassuming disposition allowed her to blend seamlessly into the nightly routine, hardly registering beyond being a reliable presence. I paused briefly outside room 412, observing Rebecca through the narrow opening of the slightly ajar door. She carefully inserted a thin needle into the patient's IV, deliberately and meticulously pressing down on the syringe plunger. The act itself wasn't unusual, yet her furtive glances and hurried movements struck me as peculiar. Once finished, instead of following standard protocol by disposing of the syringe in the Sharps container, she quickly scanned the room, then tucked the syringe discreetly into the pocket of her uniform. I knew this violated hospital guidelines, yet fatigue clouded my judgment. I convinced myself it was simply oversight, a minor lapse of procedure from an otherwise competent nurse. 2 nights later, Caroline, a nurse from the pediatric ward, approached me unexpectedly in the main lobby during my usual midnight coffee break. Caroline's face, normally warm and cheerful, wore an expression I rarely saw on night shift. Serious, slightly worried. She mentioned casually hearing concerns from other staff about missing supplies and inconsistencies with medication records. She spoke in hushed tones, her eyes scanning the surroundings warily as she emphasized her uneasiness. However, with nothing concrete to contribute, I kept silent. reluctant to cast suspicion without certainty. Yet, the following week shattered my attempts at rationalization. Rebecca's peculiar behavior continued, growing bolder each night. She administered injections swiftly, methodically moving from room to room, never documenting any details. The discarded syringes disappeared into her uniform each time. The precise, repetitive nature of her actions troubled me deeply, prompting me to quietly record patient room numbers and times, assembling fragments of a troubling puzzle. After finishing my shift one morning, I overheard urgent conversations between nurses near the elevator. A patient had died abruptly overnight, a 70-year-old man whose sudden cardiac failure baffled the attending doctors. Nursing staff murmured discreet doubts, suggesting quietly amongst themselves the possibility of medication errors. Unable to dismiss what I had witnessed any longer, I left the hospital with a growing realization that Rebecca's behavior was more sinister than negligence. Sleepless and troubled, I reviewed the sequences repeatedly at home, scribbling details into my notebook. The injections, missing syringes, and unexplained death created an undeniable pattern. Gathering courage, I reported my observations anonymously, carefully detailing room numbers, times, and actions observed. The hospital responded swiftly and quietly. A discreet internal investigation began immediately, scrutinizing surveillance footage, medical charts, and staff logs. Administrators interviewed employees privately, their questions precise yet cautious, wary of alarming the hospital staff prematurely. Within days, Rebecca was quietly escorted from the premises under the pretense of personal leave. Her departure raised quiet murmurs amongst staff, suspicion rippling subtly beneath official reassurances. Days later, local news revealed the unsettling truth. Rebecca was arrested, accused of deliberately tampering with patients' medications, resulting in 2 confirmed deaths and complications in 5 additional patients. The hospital, desperate to control public outrage, insisted thorough audits confirmed no further victims. Still, uncertainty lingered among the community, fueling speculation about her motives. Financial strain, personal grievances, or something entirely unknown. I returned to work as usual, my cart rolling down familiar hallways. Normalcy returned outwardly, but beneath the calm routine, something had irrevocably changed. The reassuring consistency of nightly tasks failed to alleviate an underlying awareness. Hospitals, despite their promise of safety and healing, could offer no protection against harm enacted by human hands. Each room, each patient, reminded me that trust itself was fragile, easily shattered by unseen betrayals. Though nothing further happened, the invisible scars lingered, forever altering my perception of the safe predictability I had once cherished. I worked nights at a gas station just off Highway 32. It wasn't remote, but at 2 a.m, it felt isolated. The highway, typically buzzing with traffic by day, stretched out empty and dark, marked occasionally by the faint glow of distant headlights. Most shifts passed quietly, routine customers grabbing coffee, or truckers refueling before continuing their route, their faces weary, expressions vacant. Occasional drifters wandered in, often disheveled, asking for cigarettes in a voice barely above a whisper, their eyes fixed on the floor as they handed over their crumpled bills. The hours stretched on slowly, each tick of the clock audible over the faint hum of fluorescent lights, creating a rhythm almost hypnotic in its dull repetition. Over time, the monotony became comforting, predictable, even reassuring. Yet every so often, an unfamiliar sound or unexpected movement outside briefly disrupted that comfort. momentarily breaking the pattern before fading back into silence. One Wednesday, just past 2:30, the bell above the entrance rang. I glanced up briefly, noticing a man walk directly to the back aisle without saying a word. Nothing unusual. Late-night customers rarely sought conversation. He browsed for a few minutes, hovering near the snacks. The station was equipped with security cameras, their live feeds visible on a monitor behind the counter. Out of boredom, I occasionally glanced at them, noticing the man's slow movements along the shelves. He didn't pick up any items. Minutes passed. He still hadn't approached the counter. I busied myself stocking cigarette packs, occasionally peeking at the monitor. The man remained by the snacks, but the low resolution made it hard to distinguish his face clearly. 10 minutes became 15, then 20. Finally, he chose a single bag of chips, approaching the register slowly. He placed the chips on the counter, silently staring downward, avoiding eye contact. I scanned them, mentioning the price, but he simply slid exact change across without a word. His hands were steady and clean, nails neatly trimmed. He turned abruptly, exiting quietly into the night. Through the station window, I saw him disappear around the corner, quickly swallowed by the darkness beyond the glow of the streetlights. Moments later, I noticed a car had been parked at one of the pumps. Its headlights were off. Checking the security footage, I realized it had arrived right after the silent customer entered. Its driver, still inside, had been waiting motionless the entire time. The car remained still as minutes passed. Eventually, its driver opened the door and stepped out, heading toward the store. She entered, moving confidently toward the register, and asked if I'd seen a man matching her husband's description. He had walked away from their home hours ago following an argument, and she'd tracked his phone to this location. I described the man who'd bought the chips, assuming that was who she meant, but she shook her head, firmly. The man I described didn't match her husband's description in the slightest. I replayed the security footage to show her clearly, but the video quality was grainy, shadows obscuring most details. Still, even from the fuzzy footage, she insisted that the figure wasn't him. Her concern grew visible. She quickly left to continue searching elsewhere. Soon after she drove away, I checked the cameras again. That's when I realized the silent man hadn't actually left. On playback, after paying, he circled around the building and re-entered through a side entrance I rarely checked, slipping quietly into the storage room. Heart pounding, I stood frozen, staring at the screen, unsure of what action to take. The storage room had no other exits, so he must still be inside. I dialed emergency services discreetly, voice barely above a whisper, hoping he wouldn't hear me through the thin door separating us. Police arrived swiftly, multiple cars pulling quietly into the parking lot with lights dimmed to avoid alerting the man inside. Officers entered cautiously, moving methodically through the aisles, their flashlights cutting through the gloom of the storage room. They found him crouched low behind shelves stacked with cartons of motor oil and windshield washer fluid, his hands visible and empty, eyes staring blankly at the concrete floor. Despite their firm orders and drawn weapons, he showed no emotion or surprise, cooperating passively as they placed handcuffs around his wrists. Authorities questioned me extensively afterward, revealing unsettling details about his past. They explained he'd repeated this same pattern numerous times, always late at night, always along quiet stretches of highway. He never stole, never harmed anyone physically. Yet his actions left behind a trail of confusion and anxiety for those who encountered him. Investigators found notebooks filled with precise details about each location. Arrival and departure times, descriptions of employees, even mundane observations of routines, and inventory. Despite extensive questioning, he never spoke or provided any explanation for his actions, only deepening the uncertainty around his intentions. I changed jobs soon after, never comfortable working alone at night again.